Welcome to the Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver podcast. We're happy you're here. On the podcast, we're certain that you'll relate to the caregiver stories and find comfort with your honorary sisters. Now, before we start, I want to remind you to go to our website, confessionsofareluctantcaregiver.com, and sign up for our newsletter. It's full of useful information that you can immediately use. Now, let's learn more about today's guest.
Hey guys, this is JJ.
And I'm Natalie.
And I'm Emily.
And welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver. So let's get started. JJ, we have the best guest here. We are excited to have our friend, Kristina Driscoll with us. And she has quite the confession because, you know, Tuesdays, if it's Tuesday, it's time for confessions. So she's going to be sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly with respect to caregiving. And I know we can all relate to that. So like all of us, Kristina's been a caregiver, but she is so much more. She is definitely not defined by that. And so Jay, why don't you tell us about our amazing sister in caregiving?
Absolutely. I would love to. Thank you, Kristina, for coming today. So Kristina has an amazing story like most of us do. Her husband was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's when her son was just 5 years old. Kristina cared for her husband while managing their household and raising her son for almost 12 years. She's another example of a superhero caregiver. She just needs a cape, basically. That journey led her to an amazing and inspiring place for these sisters. And that's where we met her. Kristina launched her podcast earlier in 2023 called She's Brave on Apple and Spotify. She helps women find their path to become brave, resilient, and authentic. She can be found on Instagram, Facebook, and at www.shesbravepodcast.com. So you definitely want to look her up. Little inside info on Kristina. She's on the board of directors of Sanctuary One, an animal rescue organization in Oregon. And she definitely has a heart for animals. In 2015, she built a cottage for immunodeficient cats. And she continues to fund that cottage each year to make sure the little guys are taken care of.
I love that.
So she's a caregiver through and through. Kristina, we are so happy to have you here today and can't wait for you to tell us what you've learned on your journey.
Wow, JJ, what a welcome.
We want everybody to know how wonderful you are.
We do think you're awesome.
And then, we just want everybody to know. So tell us, you have such a great and beautiful story, and it's led you to an amazing place. But tell us kind of how it started, like where your journey started.
Yeah. So I was about 30 and I was in a hiking club and my husband was the hike leader. So we met on a hike on Mount Rainier. Our eyes locked and it was just pretty much like that pull, that instant magic moment. Yeah. Instead of it being across the room, it was like across the trail, Yeah. But so we clicked instantaneously and long story short, he ended up being a lot older than me, even though he'd never been married, never had kids, 24 years older, but we both were financial advisors and just saw the world the same way. So within 6 months, we were married.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everything was great. We had a really wonderful time those early years together. And 4 years later, our son was born. And we were living in a little town in Oregon and life was good until our son was about 5. And my husband started repeating a lot of things and forgetting, if I told him, hey, I'm taking our son Will's, like I'm taking him to the park, and he would forget things. So that's how it started. Yeah.
So did you think how long did it take you probably to get that diagnosis? Because did it like hit you like, something's not right? Or was it with the forgetfulness, did you think, hey, let's go to the doctor and see if something more is going on?
I think at first I was a bit in denial because I think that's a coping mechanism. It's a big coping mechanism. And so for probably, at least 5 or 6 months I was in denial, but my friends really started gently talking to me too. And because they noticed it as well. So then we did go to the doctor and we did get a diagnosis.
So I know that you had said that he had that diagnosis for about 12 years. So I know that, so he lived at home and that's really when you changed hats a little bit. Like at what point? Because I know with Jason and I, when, I've been a wife and Jason and I had been together, 17 years. And then he got diagnosed with cancer. Yep. And at that moment, I had to take that hat off because there was a crisis point where that relationship shifted from wife to caregiver. Did you have like a place where you were like, it became a crisis like point where you had to shift your relationship?
Yeah. I mean, it was a crisis just getting the diagnosis. And a lot of people say to me, wow, I don't know how you did it. And you're so brave. And that's part of why I started my podcast too, because I was not brave. I'm a very, very anxious person. Like I the doctor has anxiety disorder on my chart, like great, but my whole attitude is, if I can do it, you can do it too, and it felt very much like a crisis right at diagnosis for sure.
So how did that, go ahead, Jay.
What did you continue working during that time, Kristina? Because I know of course you've still got a little one basically. Were you still working at the same time?
My husband managed our finances. And so he had retired, which was good. So he had a few retirement years, and I took over managing our investments. Okay. And that is something that's always come easily and naturally to me, is I've been investing my whole adult life, and that's been my career. So I did that. I mean, I did sometimes have people ask me like, how did you manage like your finances and take care of your husband and your son? But it wasn't, I don't know. It came very natural for me. So that part was actually not hard to do. Okay. It was the caregiving that was hard.
Okay. So what would you say was hard for you? Because I know I can think of the things for me that were challenges. Like when you started doing the caregiving part, what were the things that gave you the pause that you're like, gosh, this is harder than I thought?
With Alzheimer's, I mean, I remember at one point, a couple years in, I met a woman whose same situation as me. Her husband was a lot older than her, and her husband was in a care home at the time. And she was a real big help in explaining to me kind of like the role that changed, because you go from being husband and wife to caregiver and patient, for lack of a better word. There's probably a better word, but so I could really, I mean, that's where the grieving starts right there. You start like it doesn't happen instantaneous, but there's this gradual realization that your relationship as husband and wife is ending, like very slowly, like one forgetful moment at a time.
That's interesting perspective, because it's a little bit different than how Jason and I were, because cancer is different than that. And so the whole goal is hopefully there's a good prognosis and you come out of it. I will say this though, I mean, I've not come out of it yet. Even though he has no cancer is found in his body, for example, like right now, he doesn't get the all clear for 5 years. And so the cancer is just living here in the home with us. I always refer to her as the mistress, and that she just kind of sits between us. And so whenever we want to do something, it's like she's always there. And so I think that's a hard piece to try to manage and kind of coexist and find new normal. So I'm assuming, thinking about new normal, you had to establish a new normal. And what did that look like for you?
It was more like a child-parent relationship. And, our son, by the time he was 6 years old, he would say, "Hey, Dad, can I help you heat up lunch?" Because Dad couldn't remember how to operate the microwave. So he would, and just these things become normal though. That's just our life. Right. So my son and I we're both caregivers to our husband.
Yeah.
Really, I would say that, I would. Yeah.
Wow.
Quite an empathetic child raising.
Yeah.
I raised
Yes.
three kids of my own. So not only, is he getting experience that way, but just such empathy. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, he's always been extremely empathetic to other teens and to other people in general. And I think in our society, we have a tendency to try to really, really, really protect and shelter our children because we think that if they go through hard things, that it's going to damage them. But I never had that attitude. I always had a tremendous faith in God. And I always had a tremendous faith that this was my path, that I needed to embrace it. I was okay with it. I mean, it didn't come instantly, people, but I mean, I think over the next, after the diagnosis within a year or two, like I was like, this is my path and it's okay. And I always had faith that God was going to take care of my son too, and that he was going to be okay. And he just graduated from high school. He's doing a gap year. He's doing some travels, some work. He's enrolled at Colorado College for the fall. He set a record in high school in running at all time.
Wow.
So he did a lot. He graduated with the international baccalaureate. I'm stepping into being my mom. Being like,
You know what though?
The point is that he's doing great.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? That is so, I want to flip into that a little bit. Like, now I'm going a different direction a little.
Sure.
So you were a sandwich generation, but with a spouse and a child.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to describe it. I like that.
And not a parent and a child sandwich generation. So how was it trying to manage caregiving? Because you were dual caregiver at that point. You're caregiving laterally to your spouse, because I think up to your parent because they're older, but you're a little bit older because your husband was older than you. And that's okay. Yeah. So you're dealing with the aging piece and your spouse and caring for your son, who was a baby nugget. He was 6, 7, 8.
You're trying to get to school. So how are you managing? That's kind of my thing. Is how are you getting to school? How are we getting to doctor's appointments? Like, did you have a tribe, or how are you doing this? Yeah. Do you have a tribe? Like, how did you make this work? Because I think that's how so many people see it, because you're not just focused on him. You have so many other things going on.
Yeah. So getting back to that crisis moment in the small town in Oregon, I did have a bit of a knee-jerk reaction in that I wanted to be closer to my family. My family is just across the Canadian border. So the first thing we did immediately was move from the small town in Oregon up to a cute little town, 40 minutes from my parents' drive, very close to the Canadian border. And so that they could be there to support me. And they were helpful. It was interesting because my husband moved for me the first time. He didn't really want to leave Oregon. I think he didn't understand really the implications. Looking back on it, those people are still my best friends, the moms that I met in baby class. And those people I'm still extremely close with. And I ended up we back when my son was in high school for a while. That's kind of a whole nother thing. But we moved up to the Canadian border. My husband did that for me. He was already losing his words and he couldn't make friends in that small town, and he became very lonely. So he said to me, I want to be near my people. I remember that's how he would say it because he couldn't think of the right words. So and Emily's nodding because knowing that, your mom had word
we
search
refer to a lot of people as like our people.
Our people. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we basically moved to a suburb of Seattle because my husband came from a big family and the family was all in this Seattle area. And he was right. They were amazing. And they really were wonderful about visiting him. And so, those things were what I did to help cope, to get through the situation. Yeah.
So during the time, because I know you were parenting your son and then also supporting your husband too at the same time, how did you kind of take care of yourself? Like what was your pieces to keep your sanity? Because I'm going to tell you that feels exceptionally like you said, I'm self-diagnosed or I'm diagnosed with anxiety. Me too. Hi, hashtag me too. Even if I'm not, I am.
Yeah. Right. Like I know I kind of feel that way too. Yeah. How can you basically not have anxiety in that situation? Yeah. Like that's what you're saying. And I agree with that. Like how I don't think I'd be a human if I didn't.
Right. So what are things you did for yourself that those moments, and people say, okay, well, self-care is really not selfish. It's self-love. Somebody said that the other day, and I totally agree. What are things that you did to try to keep that sanity and keep yourself to not lose yourself to everyone because you're giving so much?
I really became a compartmentalizer, and I would go out with my friends a lot, girlfriends, big time, or with even my family or cousins or different people. And I wouldn't talk about what was going on at home at all, like zero. And people knew that, like that I just wanted to be, talking about mom stuff, being moms together, talking about our kids, talking about life. Travel. We actually did travel with my husband, even when he had Alzheimer's. We did some like National Geographic trips where the guides it was small groups, and they were wonderful. They actually kind of helped me a bit. And so we just those things help you feel like you're more normal. You kind of can forget your situation. And I also in Bellingham, I did counseling throughout the whole thing. I mean, I just think it was super, super helpful. I went to various counselors wherever I lived. I would go to see someone. That was extremely helpful too. But I think there was a lot of compartmentalizing of going out with friends and just literally pretending I was somebody else, kind of. And one time I remember, like in Bellingham, I was having lunch with my husband and one of my girlfriends and her dad. Her dad had Alzheimer's as well, and she was dealing with it. So it was great because we were super close. And I remember her looking across the table at me. It was a sunny summer day or something. And she said, let's go to Hawaii. Let's just leave all this behind us. Let's just leave. And I was like, yes.
That's okay.
We support you going to Hawaii.
Yeah, sometimes I'm thinking Emily thinks that. And I'm like, Lord, please don't let Emily leave.
No.
Stay.
I will tell you, and Emily knows this because I've said this in our podcasts. Emily, I would have my Beats earbuds in, and I'm talking to Emily as I'm going to Trader Joe's or I'm going to Morton Williams, because those were my two places that I would escape to. And I would talk to Emily, and I'd look around the city, and because we were in New York City, and I would just go and I'd say, I just felt like I was a New Yorker. I didn't even think about, I know it sounds crazy, but it was just my way to escape. And I don't know if I was pretending that I was like Carrie from Sex and the City, or maybe really Samantha, but so I'm probably more of a Samantha kind of gal, but I would just, it was those times when you were able to get away and just,
Yeah. That's such an interesting point, because I definitely did that. Like for me, even going to the grocery store, my husband was never, thankfully, that difficult. Like I know sometimes with some people, you have to take away the car keys and stuff. And I remember the day that my husband came to me in the little town by the border. He had been driving our son to school still. That was the only thing he was doing. But he literally handed me the keys. And he couldn't say a full sentence, but he said, I think you should, and then he just handed me the keys. And I said, yeah, I think you're right, and he never drove again. And so he was really, really, really graceful about things like that. But getting back to, you go to Trader Joe's, Trader Joe's, or even Whole Foods, or even any grocery store, it's like any errand. I could literally say that. Emily's nodding her head right now because she's too. Yeah. Sometimes you go out alone, and I could leave him at home alone until, the very end when he fell and hit his head. And then the doctors told me, well, this was 5 years in actually. So he was in a care home for 7 years and a long, long time. But, he was wandering at night. He was combative with anyone who wasn't me. And so I tried hiring people in my home, and that didn't work. But it's just as interesting that literally every errand, you can pretend that, and you do kind of like, I'm just a normal person and I'm here talking to the cashier and I'm talking to the guy in the meat department for a couple of minutes and I'm telling him about my day. Like that's just like, that's a huge coping mechanism. You just want to feel normal sometimes. Like you need to feel normal at times.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will tell you, and this is a thing. I think every caregiver who is listening will not think what we're talking about is crazy. Like if you haven't experienced it, you'll think that sounds crazy. Why are you making up? It's almost like you're dissociating. And the reality is you kind of are.
You kind of are.
And that's okay, because it's like daydreaming. Daydreaming is a dissociation, and it is totally healthy. So there's healthiness, and it's the way that we cope.
Yeah.
And so, but I can tell you, I know Emily is shaking her head because she's done it. And so it's really interesting how therapeutic it is for you. Because I guarantee you, every caregiver's done it. Like, I just go pretend over here for a second, and then you come back because it's always there. Caregiving never really leaves.
I think I was quite the clothes shopper. I'm not nearly as much of a clothes shopper, but I was quite the clothes shopper during those years. That was also very therapeutic.
Yeah.
You go to the nice clothing store and somebody's like, here, try on this. Here, I'll fold that up for you. Here,
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
So, it's such a different, we've had a couple of people who've had loved ones who had Alzheimer's or dementia. And so it definitely, your husband sounds like a different journey than some of our others.
Mm-hmm.
And so it breaks my heart when you say he hands me the keys and in his own way with limited speech says it's time, and that he's insightful enough. And I know people talk about meeting that individual where they are. And that's how to help them thrive, because just because they have that doesn't mean they have lost intelligence, that they're not smart anymore. It's just their ability to communicate. So I know that you said that you had to eventually, after 5 years, go into some level of facility. And so how was that decision? Because I know it wasn't easy. So how was kind of what in the, like, how did you, and it sounds like you knew from the doctor, but kind of walk me a little bit through that. And then how did your caregiving journey change him being in a facility?
Yeah, I would say that might've been the hardest moment. And I had been advised professionally, don't wait until you feel like you're going to have a mental breakdown. And this is just being said to me like this, every single person will kind of hit a wall at some point. Mm-hmm. So you want to ideally try to have them placed in a care home before you hit a really serious wall. Mm-hmm. But of course you never listen to that. You don't. So he did fall and hit his head, and so that was really, really clear. I did see a PhD psychologist who specialized in working with people with Alzheimer's, because I wasn't sure how to handle the part of telling our son. Yeah. So she gave me some interesting advice. She said, you can't tell him ahead of time. She said, because if you tell him, okay, Wills, daddy's going to the care home tomorrow, don't tell him. Well, then he's going to feel like he's betraying his dad. But if he tells his dad, he's going to feel like he's betraying me. So it's a no-win. Yeah. It was hard. It was hard to send him off to school, but my father came down from Canada, actually. And, he grew up in a tiny little country called Estonia. His father disappeared. His father was high up in the Estonian military, disappeared for years at a time because they didn't have internet. They didn't have ways of tracking people. Mm-hmm. He was fighting on different sides of the war at different times. There was chaos. So periodically throughout most of his childhood, he grew up without a father. Mm-hmm. At the end of it, he was reunited with his father in Sweden. He lived in 4 countries. He learned 4 different languages, ended up in Canada when he was 17, learned English, became a chemical engineer. He's a rock star. So, so my father came down and helped me take Bill to the care home. Bill was so oblivious at that point that he was just happy to join in on whatever activity they were doing. So there was no problem there. When my son came home from school, we had to sit him down and tell him that, for safety reasons, dad has to be in a home now. And my son began to cry really hard, and we hugged him, and my father, took him by the shoulders and looked him in the eye and said, I grew up without a father and I turned out just fine. And you're going to be just fine too. And to this day, my son still has a very, very strong bond with my dad, who's almost 90 now. And he says that he feels like, he's a lot like his grandpa. He says things like that. It's kind of interesting. So he relates a lot with his grandpa.
Hey ladies, I need to interrupt for just a second to share about the Sisterhood membership. It's basically a sale every day, and the best part, it's free. Here's the details. We're partnering with our friends at Benefit Hub and other care partners to save you money. With over 200,000 participating companies across the U.S. and abroad, you'll find discounts at your favorite local stores, huge savings on vacations, amazing deals on home, auto, and supplemental insurances, and everything in between. Go to confessionsofareluctantcaregiver.com to sign up, and then definitely tell your friends about it. They can join too. Trust me, there's a discount for everyone. And don't forget, it's free. Okay, back to confessing. So really, I'm assuming that you all visited, and as Will aged, it just became your routine. You normalized it.
Yeah.
For him.
Yeah. And I mean, we would try to go when there are activities, because then it's more fun. Like if you're doing a craft or there's some music, or then like you kind of feel like you can forget it. Sometimes there'd be live music and we could dance together. Like I have a photo of us dancing together, like probably 5 years ago, on New Year's Eve or something, it's just, yeah.
So I want to ask about what you're doing now, because I think that has brought you to an amazing place, the journey. So I talked to you a couple of weeks ago, and I know you had said there's so much that you could talk about Alzheimer's and about your journey with your husband, but that's something that has happened in your past, and you are in the present and looking forward. And so you've started a new podcast.
Yeah.
And tell me what got you to that point and talking about She's Brave, because that's me, that's Natalie, that's Emily. Tell us about that.
It's said, and I love telling you guys this story, because this is so interesting and so personal for you, because when I decided that I was going to start a podcast in September, decided to take that journey, I really felt like I need to start a podcast for caregiving, because I had felt very isolated and alone. I will admit, a lot of that was my own fault. I feel like I just kind of assumed that people wouldn't understand. And so I did feel very isolated and alone. And so the original intent was to start up a podcast to support caregivers. But as I started down that path, it felt incredibly heavy. And what I finally realized was that I'm not in the middle of it anymore, but I'm taking myself back in time and I'm living in the past every time. So if I'd done a podcast on caregiving, I would have just kept traveling back in time to a very difficult, hard, lonely time of my life. And for some reason it felt wrong, but I felt guilty. I will tell you girls, I felt very guilty, because I felt like I needed to help the world and I wasn't stepping up to the plate by starting this caregiver podcast. So I did a lot of research. I talked to close friends and family and asked them, what are my strengths? What am I here for? And the same answer kept coming back to me over and over and over again. You're incredibly brave. You're incredibly resilient. You are 100% authentic. You live your life according to your own standards. You don't worry about what other people think around you. You just charge ahead in there. And what I realized was that, yes, I mean, there were some paths, and the first time that I really stepped into my authentic self was choosing to marry a man 24 years older than me, knowing that it was the right path, knowing it was the right decision, knowing that I had found the first love of my life. And I have no regrets about that.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love that. You know, and I'll tell you this, girls, Kristina and I met through the podcast class that we're taking. And she had mentioned, oh my gosh, I love this. I was going to do this, but I decided to do this different thing. And then we just struck up an immediate friendship. And now, of course, we're besties. And because clearly we're besties. And but I love that because you're talking about brave and authenticity and being fearless. And there was a class that I did a couple of months ago that really helped me get to the podcast. It was a storytelling. It wasn't even a class. It was a part of a Small Business Association's entrepreneur, but they call it her. And so it was a women's piece. It was great. And there was a lady, Lee came on from Hoot and Holler, and she said, storytelling is healing. Storytelling is healing. She said, and I want you to finish this sentence. And you're going to write for 5 minutes. And it says, I am my fiercest when, and in my fierceness, I am. And so I think in your fierceness, you know, you feel fierce. You're brave, you're authentic, you don't apologize. I don't have to justify my answers to anyone. It gives me cold chills now because I know what I wrote. I was like, I don't have to explain why I did whatever with my husband. I don't have to explain or justify to you my decisions. And I think your podcast and what you're looking to do says that, and in its essence, who you are.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And I was going to say also, like, so many people and women would come up to me and say, you're so brave. You're so brave. And I just really want to say, okay, yes, but you are too. Like, we all are. Like, if I can do it truly, like, if you would ask me if I could do that, I would have said, no way. Like, and the other cool thing was that when I met you guys, I literally, here's my confession, took a sigh of relief. Thank God there's somebody that's going to do the thing that I was going to do, but I didn't want to do it.
You know, we have lifted your burden.
I lifted my burden because I felt guilty. Like, I know the need is so huge, and it's such a huge need out there to create a community, and where women in particular can not feel alone in this journey. But I also just knew on praying and reflecting in my own life that for some reason I wasn't meant to do this. I was not meant to have a caregiving podcast.
And you know what? His plan is perfect. I'm just going to tell you, his plan is perfect. And if you listen, and we know that if you are quiet and you listen, you'll hear the right answer.
Right.
Well, right. What I love about your story, Kristina, and even about our story, which I think all of our stories are still unfolding, they really are, is that we've all had a caregiving journey, and we're all caregivers. We've been caregivers. We are caregivers.
Yeah.
That we go through it and we grow through it. And that even if someone is in the midst of that journey right now, you can make it. You are going to make it. And it sets your life in motion. You know, I look at you and you're like, I've been in that trench, but I've turned it into something. And you're like, I'm going to be a podcast, and it's going to be about brave women. And we're like, I'm going to do a podcast, and it's going to be about reluctant caregivers. And we're going to talk about, this was a crappy day, but it's like things, you know, you just think outside the box, and it's there. And, you know, in the worst of times, you're going to find something. You're going to have to find it. So,
Well, I'm going to tell you, I love this. I absolutely love this, but you know what time it is?
What time is it, Natalie?
It's time for Sister's Choice. Emily's getting her thing. She's like, I'm ready. I'm getting it. So, okay. So this Sister's Choice is the second part of our confessions, where we get to ask questions, and we would ask that you confess. So, Emily, why don't you start?
Are you ready?
First, Emily.
Okay, let's see. We have so many great questions, and we all kind of fight over them. So I'm just trying to find the perfect one.
I'm ready.
Emily's favorite question.
Dun, 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 dun.
Bringing it here. Okay, so we all know that caregiving's hard. As you can tell, it's been a hard day for me. Listeners, I have no makeup on. It's very scary. What are one or two things, Kristina, that you wish you had known before you even started this journey? Like, is there anything?
I would say the number one thing is that community is everything in our journey. So I think I didn't reach out to enough people. I don't think I communicated enough about how much help I needed. Like, I think even if I just said, I cannot get myself to go to the store to pick up a loaf of bread and some milk. Like, I can't, just to ask somebody for a little bit, to ask for more help, to the community, it was a different world back then. Podcasts were not really a thing, or they were new and I didn't know about them. But I just think that this platform right here, podcasting, this is a beautiful, beautiful concept. And if I were going through the caregiver journey today, I would say this is a freaking lifesaver. Just join the group, because you can be with everyone else who's going on exactly the same journey as you at exactly the same time. You can jump on your computer at 2 a.m. There'll probably be someone else who has a husband wandering around at night that you can chat with,
Yeah.
Totally agree. Excellent.
True.
That girl, that is a true. Emily did a reels that we posted, and it was 2 a.m.
It was that one. I believe it was a 3 a.m. confession.
Yes.
More like a cry out. Like, what's some ideas that you all have to wind back down, to get back to sleep when potentially an hour and a half later, maybe even 30 minutes later, you're going to be back up again. And it's totally different than when you have babies. Babies, you can go right back to sleep. That's not an issue because you're exhausted. But I guess getting older now, I'm like, oh my goodness, what do I do now? So had a lot of good advice from people.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I think community is the superpower in dealing with this whole caregiver journey. Community is the key.
Yeah, I agree.
I love that. I love that. And and I always say this, relationships are the oxygen. Is the oxygen of human development. It's in relationship. It's our connectedness. It's the point of the storytelling, and why we tell stories, because we relate and we connect, and we're like, oh, that's it. That's the money. It's about being a part of a community. We were not meant to be alone. So, Jay, let's give Kristina another question.
Okay, here it is. So we always say we like to laugh, Kristina, and we have so many fun stories with our mom, things that we're just like, girls, I could not make this up. Any fun caretaking story with your husband, or even with your son, just a funny moment that you're like, Lord,
I can't even make this up.
Oh, that's such a good one. Every day can be Christmas.
I do like every day can be Christmas.
Okay, that's good.
Well, I mean, even as far as like little surprises or something, like you could like surprise them with something and they can be like so ridiculously happy about it. Like never a time.
I love you. I just every day can be
that idea.
Is a fantastic thing.
That means I could get a gift every day. Hold on, Kristina. I kind of like that. I could use that myself.
I'm never taking my Christmas tree down. That's my answer. Because I didn't want to put it up. And I just got all the ornaments on, and we did it over 3 weeks. Like the balls couldn't get up. I'm like, I did 12 balls the other day. I'm like, there you are. Nailing it. Oh, that makes me feel so good. Okay.
It does make me feel good.
So the last question, which is always a sister favorite. We always wonder who's going to take it. And this does not matter. What is your guilty pleasure?
Oh my gosh. I have so many guilty pleasures. It's ridiculous.
I mean,
how can I even pick one?
What's your favorite?
A favorite today.
Even if it's today, what's your guilty pleasure? Like, ooh, I did that just for me and I don't even care.
I would say, I'm going to say Ben & Jerry's ice cream. It's the best. The Tonight Dough, it's just delicious. It's just
what flavor? What's your flavor?
The Tonight Dough. The Tonight Dough. Yeah. It's delicious.
Ooh.
Chocolate peanut butter and all kinds of things in there.
I think last night.
You have a little carton of ice cream, and that's it. Like that's your recess.
Yeah.
From your caregiving journey.
I like that.
Yeah,
Just a little bit. I think last night we discussed the same thing who we were talking to. Hers was what was it? Chocolate, salted.
No,
caramel.
it was dark chocolate, sea salt, caramel, and
I
little
like that.
chews. And I'm like, oh, that's good. You saying ice cream in the little pint makes me think of icing that you put in the refrigerator. Cause I can remember my favorite is going in and eating icing that's been in the refrigerator. And it never makes it to the cake. I'm just sitting there eating it, or cookie dough.
Yeah,
Don't even care.
Love it.
And maybe we could do like a podcast on favorite foods, Natalie.
Our guilty pleasures.
Guilty pleasure
Guilty
foods.
pleasures. I like that.
Guilty
Good.
pleasures. That's a podcast name right there. Guilty pleasures.
Pleasure
It's
foods.
a 5-minute podcast. Come talk about that moment that you're in the bathroom eating by yourself and your kids are like, hey, what you got in there? Not a thing.
Not a thing.
Not
My
a
whole
thing.
bag of Oreos. Yeah.
Eating
I'm
them by
good.
myself.
Kristina, we cannot thank you enough for joining
love
us
you.
today. You can come back, come by, come visit us
Yay.
anytime. We have
I want to be part of this journey with you guys. I want to come along. I want to help you guys, in any way that I can. And I know you guys will be having events in the future. I want to come so we can actually hang out and have dinner together.
Yeah.
We would love that. Well, we want to thank all of our guests as well for our listeners for listening to us today. We know everybody is super busy and we so appreciate your time.
Well, friends, that's a wrap on this week's confession. Again, thank you so much for listening. But before you go, please take a moment to leave us a review and tell your friends about the Confessions podcast. Don't forget to visit our website to sign up for our newsletter. You'll also find the video recording of all of our episodes on the Confessions website and our YouTube channel. Don't worry, all the details are included in the show notes below. We'll see you next Tuesday when we come together to confess again. Till then, take care of you. Okay, let's talk disclaimers. You may be surprised to find out, but we are not medical professionals and are not providing any medical advice. If you have any medical questions, we recommend that you talk with a medical professional of your choice. As always, my sisters and I at Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver have taken care in selecting the speakers, but the opinions of our speakers are theirs alone. The views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of the Sisterhood of Care, LLC.